welcome to You Didn't Get the Memo show. I'm your host, Gloria Bailey Ray, and I'm excited that you decided to join us. We've got a great show as always, and it's information that all of us need to know. We should be sharing. We should just be awoke. We should be aware of what's going on. And I just want to remind you that the show, You Didn't Get the Memo, is about providing you, the viewer, with relevant, factual, mainstream information to help you be informed and to make informed decisions. I also want to just share with you that You Didn't Get the Memo show is airing live, not only on Facebook, as well as YouTube, but we're also on LinkedIn. And I want to give a really great shout out to Berkeley Community Media for also airing the show live. And you can check it out on Comcast Channel 28 and 32. If you have, I'm sorry, 33. If you have questions, you can place them in the comment section for my guests, and we'll do our very best to respond to you. Okay, my guest today is Mr. Derek Barnes, who is the CEO of East Bay Regional Housing Association. And I just want to level set before we jump into this. It's no secret that people of color are significantly less likely than white people to experience evictions and homelessness in the United States. This is the result of centuries of structural racism that continues today, that has systematically and purposefully excluded African Americans and other from equal access to housing, community support, and opportunities for economic mobility. According to the National Low Income Housing Coalition across California, we're just California, but in all states, but in California, there's a shortage of rental homes affordable and available to extremely low income households whose incomes are at or below the poverty guidelines or 30% of their AMI or their area mean income. Now, many of these households are severely cost burdened, spending more than half of their income on housing. Severely cost burdened poor households are more likely than other renters to sacrifice the necessities like food and health care to pay the rent and to experience unstable housing situations like eviction, which is why today my guest, Mr. Derek Barnes, again, who is the CEO of East Bay Rental Housing Association, and I are going to be talking about housing, advocacy, and education. Mr. Derek Barnes, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Gloria. It's great to be with you tonight.
Oh, this is exciting. I've had the opportunity to hear you speak and talk, in this arena around housing, and it just grabbed me, and I was like, you know what? We've got to have this gentleman on the show and to talk. And so let's just start just a little bit, tell our viewers a little bit about your background, what's your backstory? And then we're going to get into, what is EBRAH for short, you guys, East Bay Rental Housing Association. What is it all about and why does it exist?
Great. Thanks, Gloria. So I am originally from New York. And I moved to California about 20 years ago. I've been in the telecom technology industries for a long time, starting companies, growing companies, and consulting along the way. And I was recruited to become EBRAH's CEO about 11 months ago. So I'm sort of newly minted in this position. But although I'm not a newbie, because I think you lose that after about 6 months, but I'm almost a year in, and it has been an incredible journey. I can't describe the feeling of having impact and being able to use and utilize my experiences in for-profit, nonprofit. I've done a lot of philanthropic work over the decades, and I really think that EBRAH provided a great opportunity to kind of bridge that gap and allow me to bring my expertise to the association so that we can help our communities.
Well, Thank you for that. And I think that that's important. Like you said, it's not like this is, your first walk in the park, so to speak. You've been around and you've done a lot of things. And what you, as in your role as the CEO of EBRAH, and the other members that make up EBRAH, what you guys are doing, it is vitally important that community knows this. And I do want to say to the viewers, even though we're all around the world, listen, for those of you I know in the United States, there are different housing associations. And why I think it's important, you need to lock and load into what's going on within your particular housing association. And some of the things you will hear Derek talk about today, hey, check it out. Find out for yourself. There's nothing better than being informed. So, Derek, I ask you, after you talked about your background, let's talk about what EBRAH is all about. Why does it even exist? Give us some context around that, please.
Yeah, absolutely, Gloria. So first and foremost, I forgot this tidbit because I do come from a family that has been in development and rental housing for decades back east. And so I kind of feel like that's in my DNA, although it didn't it got expressed late in life. But I am a rental property owner, been for a long time, owned several. And I got started probably like many people got started where I couldn't afford my first property. So I saved up my coins and invested in a duplex, but I couldn't afford it on my own. But the other unit allowed me the rental income to afford the property. And I think a lot of people get started in that way. And then over time, you discover, do you like being a housing provider? Can you do this? Can you make a living at it? And then people have different journeys around that. And so that's the beauty of having an association like East Bay Rental Housing Association, because we like to say that we are here to kind of meet you where you are, no matter where you start this journey. And even if you haven't started the journey, you're thinking about getting into the business of rental property ownership or development, we're here to help. This association has been around for, over 80 years. It was founded in 1931. It's a full service nonprofit trade association, and it really is dedicated to providing safe, accessible, affordable, well-maintained residential rental housing for everyone that's compliant and meets local ordinances and state laws. I also like to tell people that it's the largest trade association in the East Bay. So we're really proud about the work that we do. To answer your other question, Gloria, why are we here, right? So the association, I like to say, exists to support about 1,600 members. We own, over 36,000 units of rental property in 25 cities in the East Bay. And our members are essential housing, they provide essential housing services to over 100,000 residents in Alameda and Contra Costa County. That is a big responsibility, right? And we like to say that, part of doing that means that we provide information to those rental property owners so that they are compliant, that they're following all of the state and local laws around running rental property. And we are in an area that is subjected to a lot of laws, a lot of restrictions, and people can find themselves in trouble very quickly. And our association is here to help people avoid those situations.
Okay, awesome. And I appreciate you really expounding on that, because when people think about, what can they do? What are they going to do for me? It's always, what's in it for me? So, we talk about that. But let me just say, I want to thank all of you guys who are tuned in, from all around. So thank you guys so much for being here. As I've been saying, Mr. Barnes here is going to drop some knowledge on y'all and some stuff that you're going to want to know. So make sure you got your pad and pen handy. So let me just jump in and talk about the COVID-19 Rent Relief Program, or EBRAH, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program.
The mouthful.
It is, and that's why I say EBRAH, but let me tell people what that is. I know everyone's caught up with acronyms, but what's the importance of this program? Who does it help?
Yeah, this is a really critical piece of legislation that came down, and it happened under two administrations, right? So under the Trump administration back in December, as part of a continued COVID relief program, the federal government allocated about $25 billion in what we call the first tranche of funds, and that would be ERAP 1. Under the Biden administration in the American Rescue Plan that was enacted back or signed into legislation back in March, there was another, $22 billion of aid. And so together, the federal government has made about $46 billion available for rental assistance across the 50 states. And California received about $5.2 billion. So essentially, this is a rent relief program, and it was enacted to help renters and property owners who were impacted by COVID to find relief, due to no fault of their own because of the pandemic, and having households lose income during the pandemic, and providing this program allows people who have suffered, some kind of economic hardship as a result of the pandemic to find some relief for paying rent, for paying utilities, including internet, internet service, to find some relief to pay those, to pay anything that is owed to a housing provider if you are a renter. And that's fundamentally what the ERAP, as we like to call it, this program is meant to solve.
Right, right. Derek, in between you speaking, we also are getting some questions. And so one of the questions from one of the viewers says that I'm sure the laws vary from state to state, but my question is, what are the rights of the landlords during the COVID-19 times? So we may jump around and come back
Sure.
with some things, but I love that. So thank you so very much for that question. So you want to take that, Derek?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're gonna play some nomenclature game here, right? Because we don't like to, and my members know this because I've been saying this for 10 months. We never like to refer to ourselves as landlords, or having tenants, because it's it's antiquated language. Number one. Number two, it conjures up sort of this feudal sort of time that exists where there were landlords and tenants, and that's kind of not where we are. And we can have a different conversation because language changes, and so we like to use the term. You'll hear me say either a housing provider or a rental housing owner operator. I would refer to those who are the residents as renters. So I want to elevate our language, because I think language is important, and how we describe ourselves is really, really important. So back to the question,
Right.
how does it protect? Well, fundamentally, in almost all cases, when someone applies, and in most cases, it takes the housing provider and the renter to both fulfill a part of the application. In all, no matter where you are applying in California, that's going to typically be the case. In that scenario, and we can go into a more detail about this later, but once the application is approved and ready to be, and funds ready to be distributed, the funds actually go to the housing provider. In most cases, there are some exceptions, but in most cases, those funds are actually distributed to the property owner operator. So I think that's the first thing to understand about this ERAP program.
All right, good. So thank you so much for that. The viewers says, I gotcha. So thank you for level setting. But we're no longer landlords, and I agree with you in terms of changing that narrative and not talking about or speaking in something that conjures up something really negative when you think about it.
And Gloria, and I think the other thing too is that you and I talked a little bit about this, is that, and we want to, it's not changing the language for changing language sake. It really is about thinking about the symbiotic relationship between someone who owns rental property and the customer who is the renter. And without these two people, right, that the business can't exist. But oftentimes when we hear landlord and tenant, it just conjures up this tension.
I agree.
That shouldn't be there, because we need each other. And I think that's the point.
Yeah. You know what? When we come back, Derek, I want to ask you let's talk about the, first of all, just briefly, if you can kind of say or speak to the percentage of people in this particular case in Alameda County who's behind in rent, if there's a percentage, if you guys get those numbers, but also what the eligibility criteria is to receive these funds for the renters, but also for the home providers. You alluded into that by saying how the funds come, but let's talk about what the criteria is for that. So you guys don't go away. Keep your questions coming. I really, really appreciate it. And you are tuned in to You Didn't Get the Memo show with my guest, Mr. Derek Barnes, CEO of East Bay Rental Housing Association. We'll be right back, you guys.
Stem is precise, no margin for error.
Dare to forget that. Dare to have fun with it. Get weird with it. Dare to load their minds. Dare to explore. Dare to STEM. Learn more at She Can STEM.
Let's get back to talking smack with a side of mac and cheese. Before we can safely come together, we need the facts on COVID-19 vaccines. To get the facts, visit getvaccineanswers.org so you can make an informed decision when vaccines are available to you.
All right. If you guys are just tuning in, I want to first of all, again, thank you so much for tuning in and hanging in here. I have this dynamic gentleman, the CEO of East Bay Rental Housing Association, Mr. Derek Barnes, and we're really talking about information that we all need to know, regardless of what state you're in. And I want to thank you who are, that one question from Texas. Thank you guys so much for sending in this information, because this is how and where you get knowledge. And as we know, knowledge is power. Before we went to break, one of the questions that I posed to my guest, Mr. Barnes, was, the percentage. Can you just talk about, let's wrap our head around just in California, but in Alameda County alone, the percentage of people in the county that's behind in rent, if you have those numbers.
Yeah, Gloria. So I think this for a whole host of reasons, it's tough to be completely accurate. But I think most people agree that about 1 in 5 households, right, experienced some form of not being able to pay rent, fell behind in paying rent, continued to be behind in paying rent since March of last year, 2020. So that's 1 in 5 households, right? So, rough math here. Oakland, as an example, by my calculations, has probably about 110, rental units. So if we think about 1/5 of that, we're talking about 20,000 households, or 20,000 units of rental property that need some form of assistance. That's a lot. That's a lot of households.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And when we extrapolate that out to Alameda County in general, by my estimates, somewhere between, and this includes Oakland's, 110, something around, 270 to 280,000 units of rental housing. Do the math. 1/5 of that is a lot of households
Yeah.
that are in need of some form of assistance. And I got to tell you, so the way we started off this conversation too, and I'm sure that's not a big surprise to many of your viewers, is that skews to BIPOC communities, right?
Yeah.
That are in most need, and the numbers support that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And remember, my opening statement was, when you think about the BIPOC, the Black, Indigenous, people of color who suffer, and to me, needless, it's just not even necessary. Everybody deserves housing. Everybody deserves to be housed. That blows my mind. And just looking at the numbers, what you just shared, it just really and truly doesn't make sense. And so this is why I want to have that conversation and talk about what's available to help, the owners and also the renters, so that they are aware. And we're going to get into that, but, the eligibility criteria, that is required for the renters as well as the homeowners or providers. So can we talk about what that looks like for people who may be, because it has to be something that's holding people back from being afraid to apply for these funds. You just said in the first tranche, $25 million. So
billion with a B.
Oh, but billion.
Billion.
So
right?
I can't correct that. Billion.
That's right. And what I didn't say earlier is that, so California, of the 46 billion allocated by the federal government, 5.2 came to California. The governor announced back in August an additional, $5+ billion. So we're talking about $10 billion of aid to support people in California who are behind on their rent. That is a lot of money. And there's another side to the story we'll get into a little bit later that really, and I think, Gloria, you heard me get animated about this in another meeting, because the funds aren't flowing fast enough, right?
Absolutely, right.
And that's causing a whole host of unnecessary pain.
Yeah.
But back to your question about the eligibility. And so let me provide some additional context as well in terms of what EBRAH did early in the year, which is when we, once we, heard about SB 91 and the additional funds coming from the federal government and the changes that were enacted, we kicked into high gear because we knew it was going to be a mess. And we can talk about that a little later. But we had the foresight to know that, boy, whenever governments usually start programs, it's never smooth. The Affordable Care Act is a great example of that. And so we didn't think this was going to be any different. So we kicked into gear and locked and loaded on people who were industry experts, people who kind of understood the program, invited them in to start to educate our members. And so we started that earlier in the year. We also saw another opportunity too to create additional assistance, because we knew that, true to form, whenever we start a process, especially if it's being sponsored by the government, and this is no bash to our government, because I think the intentions were good, but sometimes getting things started very quickly is always ripe for a lot of different problems that can come with that.
Right.
Part of it was the challenge of actually completing the application. It was cumbersome. It was intrusive. It was a lot of words that I can't use tonight. But all that to say is that we provided assistance for people who were in need. And to date, we've helped over 200 people go through the application process, right? Both for Contra Costa, Alameda counties. So we had great insight on what that process was actually like. And knowing that allowed us to have a level of empathy to help support people through that process.
Right.
We also invited renters in too, because we were like, listen, if both these, these stakeholders need to complete this application, right? We knew that our housing providers had a lot of challenges with the kind of information that was being asked of them, right? And the same went for the renters, right? Really kind of personal information about the household and who's in it. And we knew that was going to turn a lot of people off. But what I would say is that we help people move through that process, number one. And along the way, we were providing feedback, both at the state level and at the local level, to give the program administrators feedback on how to make it better.
Right.
Like what do you really need to ask a household or someone who's applying to this, and really stick to the fundamentals and not scare people away.
Right.
So back to your question about the eligibility, right? It's fairly simple, right? For the renters, you need to be able to certify, loss of work and income as it relates to COVID during the time period of March 20th to present. Generally speaking, there's some caveats to this depending on where your property is, but generally speaking, you have to meet the 80% or less AMI. You can sublease. It can be a sublease that's accepted. There has been a great priority, especially in Oakland, around very low income households at the 30% AMI or less level. And also priorities around formerly homeless and incarcerated individuals, including households with children. So that's essentially the criteria for renters. For housing providers, proof of ownership, you have to have a rental ledger, you have to be able to produce a W-9. There has been a priority for Alameda County and Oakland to have fewer than 5 units. If you are a housing provider that's retired or receiving Social Security, or you are in an imminent danger of defaulting on a loan, were also conditions of priority that help move you faster through the queue.
Right.
So that's generally, the criteria for who can apply. But what's interesting is that more people should be applying that haven't applied.
Right.
And that is the nut that we're trying to crack. And there's a whole host of reasons for that. We are working very closely. I'm really proud, Gloria, I think you heard me make this announcement several weeks ago. Really proud that we were selected by the county of Alameda to participate in a grant that allows us to continue this helping and supporting our community through this application process, because they saw the benefit of what we were doing. And they also saw that we were able to kind of reach into different communities that they may not have reached into.
Right. And I think that was so critical. One of the other reasons to have you on the show to really talk about what really goes into this, because as we know, anything coming from the government, a lot of times most people they are fearful, right?
Skeptical. They're completely
Like
skeptical. Yeah.
what does this, what does this really mean? How is this going to come back and bite me? But knowing, and I really want our viewers to know, if you are a homeowner, a provider, if you are a renter, you guys, you got to have this, what is a symbiotic relationship where you guys work together. So guess what? The renters get their rent paid and they become current.
Yep.
For you as the home provider, you're not in jeopardy of losing your home, being foreclosed on. So to me, it's a win-win situation. And with this type of money floating around, it is critical. And so this is why having the CEO here from East Bay Rental Housing Association, you guys say to you, hey, we are working with you. We will work with you. This is what it takes. Because I'm going to tell you, one of the questions that I had for you, Derek, was, the home providers, not participating in the program. And I think that you just alluded to that. That sometimes people can make things so cumbersome.
Yes.
It's crazy. What are the basic things that I need to know? What's your name? What's your address? Have you been unemployed, or did you lose your job, due to COVID from this period of time to this period of time? How far behind are you on rent? Those are basic things that we need to know. And we also know when you look at a BIPOC community, a lot of times there are people there. It's like when you're trying to do the census. People don't want to talk about that.
That you raise an excellent point,
Okay.
which is so part of the let's just use Oakland as an example, right? Because I kind of know these numbers a bit more here. So you figure that about 20,000 households need assistance. Now, based on what the city has told me, that there've been several thousand applications submitted. About 2,000, maybe more at this point, have been processed, right? Think about that. 20,000 households in need, 2,000 applications that have been processed. And the other piece of this equation is the time it takes for payment to occur. I have people who started with us back in March. As soon as these programs were open and available, and Oakland had its portal up, and the county had its portal up, and the state had its portal up for people to apply, some of those people have still not received payment yet. And we have been barking, we have been fighting to figure out why that is. Some of that is without kind of getting too much in the weeds. It really has to do with for Oakland, the back end processors that they engage to help fulfill the application process, because it's not really the city doing it. There are other nonprofits that are involved in completing that process, and there are several involved. So just imagine for a second, right? You've got a website, and then you have 4 entities behind the scenes managing all the applications in various ways at various times with various resources, and the coordination between all of that can't be smooth, right? And so there are complications just in terms of standardizing the process that needed to be worked through. And to the city's credit, they have taken time to optimize, and they're doing work to improve that. But there's still a lag time in terms of when the actual check gets distributed, right? So there's the processing time, and then there's the check distribution time.
Yeah.
And the good news, because I like to give the not so good news and the good news. The good news is that we are hearing that more checks are getting in the hands of housing providers for people who have completed the application process. It's taken a long time, but those checks are coming. And what we know about human nature, right, is that if you told me that I'm going to have to be subjected to an application process that's going to be intrusive and ask me all this personal information and make me do a jig and do all this stuff, and I got to get my renter involved, and I'm not going to get a check in a timely fashion, I'm not sure if that's the kind of incentive, right, that would have me rush to try to get an application submitted. So I think with the streamlining, the standardization of the process on the back end, and now we're seeing more checks that are being distributed. People will people talk about that stuff, right? And then that creates a whole energy in and of itself because the word spreads. Oh, Gloria, you got a check for this? Oh, yeah, you know what? And when I filled out the application, it wasn't so bad. Oh, really?
Right.
My renters are behind. Oh, maybe you got that done. I'm going to try to get that done now. That's the way this has to work this way. The other piece I think, Gloria, that you tapped into is that there's another part of the rental market that no one wants to talk about, right?
Yes.
It's the part of the market that doesn't have right checks. They don't have a lease. They probably are living, maybe not in a less than compliant sort of situation, right? And how do they engage in the process?
Right.
And so, and there are a lot of units out there that are like that.
Yeah. I agree. And I just think that that's why it's so important that we're having this dialogue today and to talk about it. One, is because we want people to know, hey, look, you've got to get help and let's do this. Number two, hope that whoever is behind the scenes and processing, you got to process more than 2,000 checks if you got 20,000 applications. Let's be for real. This is information. I mean, everything, technology. What's the thing? Which actually, you answered the question, which led me to talk about who's running the EBRAH program, because when you really and truly look at it, that's also a deterrent. People say, you know what, if it's going to take me 12 months and they're already foreclosing on my property and I put this in 11 months ago, that's absolutely ridiculous. So whoever is out there, I'm just going to say to you, you need to get your stuff together. That just does not even make any good sense at all.
And what's interesting, again, it's like, we want to work with our municipal partners to improve the process, right? But at the same time, I've been interviewed by reporters and they've asked me to comment on things. And so I look at, other cities and what they've learned through this process. Like, for instance, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and I didn't talk about this before, what makes the program really complex is that depending on where the property is located, it may be different. The application process may be different. So if you have property in Oakland, as an example, you have to go to the Oakland, portal, Keep Oakland House portal. If you live in Fremont, you have to go to the Fremont portal. If you have property, outside of those two cities, but within Alameda County, you got to go to the Alameda County. And if you don't have property in any of those locations, right, you have to go to the state. So all of a sudden, it's a really convoluted maze to kind of figure out. And the point I was trying to make is that as other cities have learned how difficult it is to run their own programs, right, they're saying, we learned, oh no, we're going to let the state handle it. San Francisco did that. Los Angeles did that. And because the state has the resources, right, to run this program in the way that it needs to be run, with the right set of standards and the consistency and the resources that's needed in order to kind of, improve the time it takes to get from filling out an application
Right.
and getting a check.
Right. So, Derek, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, there are a couple of things that, I want to make sure that we get it in because we've got a question about rental in New York as it relates to how property owners are not being protected. But also, I want to get to you talking about the PPP loans for property owners who's eligible and who will apply, because this is important. And we're going to also talk about ADUs as well. So, and the moratorium, the eviction ban moratorium. So we got a lot to cover in the next 15 minutes or so. So you guys don't go anywhere. We're going to answer your questions. You're tuned in to the You Didn't Get the Memo show with my awesome guest, Mr. Derek Barnes. Don't go anywhere, guys. Thank you for hanging in.
Thank you for watching the You Didn't Get the Memo show with your inspirational host, Gloria Bailey Ray. It's your contributions that make this happen. To become a sponsor, send an email to youdidn'tgetthememo@gmail. That's the letter U, didn't get the memo. If you're not in a space to be a sponsor, but you like what you hear, we simply ask that you support what you like by making a contribution to the show. There are 3 ways to make an online donation. Visit paypal.me/Gloria Bailey Ray or Cash App or Venmo, Gloria Bailey Ray. Give what you can. Your support is appreciated.
Home fire drills give your family a plan of action. Show everyone 2 ways out of the house, pick a safe meeting spot, and get there in under 2 minutes. Then practice so everyone knows exactly what to do. Go to ready.gov/fire drill and learn how to prepare your family.
Okay, we're back with my awesome guest, Mr. Derek Barnes, CEO of East Bay Rental Housing Association. And before we went to break, I posed a couple of things at you, Derek. But let's start with, first of all, what are the PPP loans for property owners and who's eligible to apply? And there's the PPP1 and the PPP2. Talk about them. Are they forgivable? Is there a max amount of these loans? Let's just talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, I think for property owners, I think the thing to focus on is PPP2, right?
Okay.
Because there aren't and forgive me, I'm not an expert in this particular program, but I know people who have applied and have assisted in the application process. And so the difference between the two is largely that limits have changed. There were limits in PPP1, less limits in PPP2, and also to sort of the criteria was also sort of loosened up as well. And so what you fundamentally need to know is that if you have a business that has employees, right, and you can prove that you were impacted by the pandemic, and that you have you have employees on the payroll and rent that you needed to pay, you can apply through usually I don't know when these the programs have closed. Sometimes banks that are acting on behalf of the SBA are actually taking the applications. Some of those banks have sort of open enrollment periods, and they may be open, they may be closed. But if you find an institution that is taking on PPP applications and you have employees who are on the payroll, I believe that includes yourself as an employee, as long as your organization can demonstrate that it has payroll, employees, you were impacted by COVID, you should apply. You should apply. They'll ask you for financial information for sure. And it is comparative financial information, quarter to quarter. I believe you have the option of doing quarter to quarter comparisons so they can see, how the pandemic has impacted your business to determine your eligibility. You can do it quarter to quarter, or you can do it year over year. Your choice. right?
Okay.
But the goal here is apply, find a lending institution that is doing the SBA loans, apply, and give them the required documentation. I have to tell you, it's not that complicated what they're asking for. It's fairly simple. So don't feel like it's, oh my God, they're going to kind of get into my business and they're going to want financials, right? Because they're giving you money.
Right.
But the likelihood of you being approved is really high as long as you can show that there was adverse impact due to the pandemic. And Gloria, the most important part of your question is that, yes, these loans are forgivable. You have to go through a process, at a certain point after the funds have been distributed. But then you go through the forgiving process, and basically what happens is that loan turns into basically a grant that you don't ever have to pay back. There's no cost to it. And even if it does not convert, right, for whatever reason, perhaps you didn't meet the requirements, right, you still have a loan that is at 1%.
Oh, wow. I mean, that in itself is huge. And so you guys, you hear that out there? Definitely. Thank you so much for that information, Derek. I want to go back to the question for about New York. And it was when we were talking about the other funds. And the question was, in New York, those funds go to the tenants, which leave the homeowners unprotected. So and you're from New York, so any thoughts about how that they can go about dealing with that? Because that was my thought initially. I was thinking, if the tenants are getting the funds and they've got money, and so and they're like, I'm just getting a pass on rent because there's a moratorium, you can't evict me, then how does that all work? So this is actually a great question, from this gentleman.
That is a tough one. I got to tell you, like, New York is my hometown. The idea that could occur is just mind-boggling. Like, we have so many challenges in California. That's not one of them.
Right.
And I think the conclusion, and I apologize, I'm not totally up on what is happening at the moment in New York, but I believe that there's a lawsuit that is taking shape in New York City on behalf of rental property owners,
Right.
And it's largely centered around, the eviction moratorium, but eviction moratorium and EBRAH, in my mind, kind of go hand in hand.
Right.
Right. It's like, so I know that there's a lawsuit that's out there. I think, and of course it will be challenged, but I think it has merit because, what essentially is happening is that the government is really fundamentally kind of overstepping in its attempt to try to negate contracts between rental property owners and their renters. And that's a private contract that both parties entered into. And so, if someone isn't legitimately impacted by COVID, and we have some of this in California too, and certainly in the East Bay that we're trying to wrestle with too. But those are fewer examples. I think most people who are applying, for relief, have an authentic need, right? So let me just say that. But for New York, I think the challenge and the way forward is probably going to happen through the courts, through this lawsuit.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you so much, for that. So, Pure, I hope that kind of gives you some context in terms of, where to move and how to do this. All right. So let's quickly talk about, I'm loving this. The loans are forgivable. So people.
Right. It's like there's no downside. And I'm telling you, it literally takes about, as long as you have decent financials,
Mm-hmm.
and reporting intact, and most businesses you do out of QuickBooks or your spreadsheets or whatever it is, it really takes about 30 minutes to apply.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. So, like say to viewers, let's get on it. I want to thank my viewers who are tuned in from Arkansas. You guys are awesome. Thank you so
From
much for
all
being here
over.
with me. Yeah, all over. That's the thing. That's what You Didn't Get the Memo show is about. So let's talk about ADUs, the importance of them and why they exist. What's the goal of having an ADU? Because all of a sudden people are like, oh, I can have an adult, dwelling unit on my property. And next thing you know, you got like 20 people living in it. So, let's talk about that. What are
Well,
ADUs and why do they need to exist?
so we can have a whole show about this. So Gloria, maybe we might talk about that, because to me, this is one of the most exciting things that's going on in the business of housing, generally speaking. And part of this is sort of like a what's old is new again, right? Because back in the day, I remember, like, when I was really young, that there were in-law units and granny units. Like, remember what we call those? Right? So it's sort of like we're kind of going back to that.
Right.
But to go back to how Gloria started our conversation, which is that in a lot of municipalities and a lot of geographies, right, people of color were kept out of the business of owning property, right, through different zoning ordinances, right? So, for instance, in Berkeley, as an example, you can only build a single family home on a lot, right? Many that left a lot of people out of being able to afford property, right? Because the whole idea here is that if you can maximize, right, housing on an existing piece of land, right, that's nirvana, right? So if you're already a homeowner, and you say, hey, listen, I've got a 5,000 square foot lot, I got a single family home on it, I can make a provision to have either a separate structure on it that can house someone who needs housing, a family member, whatever that is, right? It provides a unit of housing. And, right, this happened with current legislation that just got passed, SB 8, 9, and 10, yay, all good. It also allows conversion to happen, right, on the existing structure. So you can convert space in the existing structure that you have that might be a single family home. Maybe it's like an attached garage, right? And you can convert that space, and that becomes an ADU. And then you can actually put another freestanding structure on it that's an ADU as well. So already you can take a single family home, right, and make it a residence, a 3 household sort of residence. And as a property owner, right, you're optimizing your assets too. Right. It's like, and you're generating opportunities for rental income. And you're providing housing.
Yeah. Like you said, nirvana.
Like nirvana.
Yeah.
I toured one last piece of, like, this is so exciting. All this year, we have done so many pieces on ADUs. We write about it. We have guest presenters come in and talk about this with our members. It's an exciting area of expanding housing. And like I said, with the recent legislation that's passed, SB 9, SB 10, that really deal with density and rezoning, like, this is just a slam dunk. And I think I was just touring an outfit earlier today called Mighty Builders in our backyard that's doing really innovative stuff in terms of housing construction along the lines of ADU. It is really exciting about where the movement around solving some of our high housing crisis, is really kind of ending up. And it really is, I think we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So that leads me to this question. Just real quickly, on September 30th, the California eviction ban moratorium was scheduled to end. Uh, was that extended or did it end? Because, that will definitely affect, the protection for the renters.
Yeah. So, Gloria, so here's the news, and I wouldn't even say it's good news and bad news.
Okay.
So, the eviction moratorium did not get extended in California,
Mm.
right? Okay. But if you live in a county like Alameda,
Mhm.
right, which had its own ordinance in place around the health crisis, right, that hasn't been lifted, right? When that is lifted, and we don't know when that will be lifted, there's a 60-day period, right, for if you're a housing provider, and let's just say you have an uncooperative renter, or
Right.
you have a renter who is in breach, I mean, legitimately in breach of their rental agreement.
Mhm.
And maybe they're even paying, right? But they're a nuisance, there's health concerns, safety concerns, whatever, right? There needs to be a path for removing that renter.
Absolutely.
And that can't happen until the health crisis is lifted,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
So I think from, yes, it hasn't been extended. However, local ordinances that are in place that also need to be addressed so that the continuation of the eviction moratorium, can't be in perpetuity, right? That's another added piece to this. But what we tell our members is this: listen, legitimately, if you believe that removal is necessary, right, get your ducks in a row, make sure that you apply for rental assistance, maybe even if your renter doesn't want to cooperate, but you can demonstrate that you attempted to apply, you attempted to notify the renter, right, of this process, and so that when it comes time, you can provide the supporting evidence so that you can make your case.
Yeah.
And perhaps in that process, you will convince the renter to apply
Right.
and to do their part in getting rental assistance paid if they were legitimately impacted by COVID.
Right. And I think that's the operative word, legitimately impacted, because there are people who really were and who have not applied and they really
That's right.
should. So that's what we want to get across. Derek, I want to ask you this. Describe EBRAH's commitment to the communities of Alameda and Contra Costa counties. And can you tell us more about your organization's Community Forward initiative in 2 minutes or less?
Well, there's a lot. I get so excited about this piece of it because what we're doing is really trying to be a different kind of association in the community of Contra Costa and Alameda County. The Community Forward initiative is really just to create collaborative opportunities between housing providers, local businesses, community organizations, our city and county government partners, to help resolve social and economic challenges within the East Bay. That's what it is simply. How it is being executed is that we are partnering with people that we haven't historically, partnered with or had conversations with, other nonprofits. So we just had our big trade expo as an example last Wednesday. And what we decided as an organization is that we would donate the proceeds of ticket sales and silent auction proceeds to 4 local nonprofits that are in housing. And so that's what we mean. We want to have this sort of multiplier effect where we're doing good, we're creating good for our members, but we're also a part of the community in this way that kind of helps us all lift each other up and thrive. And that's really what the Community Forward initiative is all about.
Yeah. So, Derek, what do you want people watching this show to take away from today's show?
Yeah. Boy, that's a great question, Gloria. I think, one else, I said this earlier, I think the power of language is really important. We retire language when it becomes antiquated. I want us to move away from landlord and tenant and kind of take on a new way of describing what we actually do, which is providing housing. We have renters and residents, and it's a symbiotic relationship. So that's number one. Number two is like really recognizing the strength of our community, the networking opportunities, engagement, collaboration, and thinking about, engaging in a different way. Because at the end of the day, right, the essential business of rental housing is a people business. Like without renters and residents, property owners and managers, suppliers and service providers and vendors, people, the rental home industry just can't function.
Right, right. Absolutely. Okay. Derek, don't go anywhere. You stay right there. To my viewers, here's what I want to say. First of all, I want to thank my guest, Mr. Derek Barnes, who is the CEO of East Bay Rental Housing Association, for being on the show today. A general reminder and ask is for each of you to remember to support our efforts by inquiring about our sponsorship package opportunities, or if you'd just like to become a supporter. If you're not in the space to become a sponsor, you can still support by making a donation of any amount, because there is a blessing in the giving. Today's show was sponsored in part by Crispy, and I want to remind all of you guys, hey, be sure and follow me on all my social media platforms and mark your calendars for every Tuesday at 5 p.m. for another great show if you didn't get the memo. We do have one caveat. On next week, instead of the show airing on the 12th, it will do a special airing with Dr. Kim Rhodes of Ujama, who will be on the show on Thursday, November 14th. So look for that information, all right? Listen, if you're in need of some midweek inspiration, I want to encourage you guys to be sure and tune into my podcast, Real Talk with Lady G, every Thursday, 6 p.m. on Spreaker. That's Spreaker, Spreaker.com. I also want to give a quick shout out to all of my viewers, my donors, my sponsors. Thank you guys so much for your support. As I always say, if you didn't take anything away from today's show, then it's really you who didn't get the memo. Now, until this time next week, I want you guys to have a great week. Give thanks for all of your blessings. Stay safe, and always remember to pay it forward. After all, it's the quality of your life that is determined by the decisions that you make. I'm your host, Gloria Bailey Ray. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Be well.